Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the digital cinematography panel today. My name is Elise, and I'm a field marketing specialist here at Foundry. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists, as well as my colleagues, Jordan Thistlewood and Gary Jones, who will be co-hosting today's panel. On our panel today, we have Andrew Roberts, Giuseppe Improta, and Christophe Brejon. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few simple housekeeping things. To get started first, the webinar will be recorded and a link will be sent directly to your inbox. Also, as part of that email, there will be a follow-up survey. We're looking for just for your feedback. It's really important to us and we'd love to hear it. So if you have a couple minutes, we encourage you to fill out that survey after today's webinar. And also the session will be ending with a live Q&A. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please be sure to add it into the questions tab. Over the past couple months, Foundry has hosted over 35 virtual events as part of our virtual event series, and all of those webinars are available on demand on our live storm page. Also, moving forward, we'll be hosting 1 to 2 webinars a week. Our next virtual event will be a Skill Up with Josh Parks, What I Wish I Knew and Knew, and that'll be held on September 29th. In the following week, we'll be talking with Framestore about their internship program. To stay tuned to our events, just follow us on our website, foundry.com/events. You can see all of our postings listed there. And if you have any feedback, just reach out to us at virtual.events@foundry.com. We also encourage you to check out our Foundry Learn page. There you can find tutorials not only for Katana, but all of our products. In addition to tutorials, we have installation guide, what's new in the latest release, and more. I'll post a link to the Learn page in the chat as well if you're interested in checking that out. In addition to our Learn page, we also have our Insights Hub. There you can find a series of articles on industry trends. We also just wrapped up a 5-part series, which includes the history of lighting all the way to today, current trends in visual effects. We also encourage you to follow us on social media to stay up to date. You can find us either at Foundry Team or at the Foundry Team. And finally, I'd like to just thank all of our speakers today for participating, and all of our speakers have participated in our previous virtual events. Thanks to you, you've made this series a great success, and we look forward to having more great conversations. And so, with that being said, just like to pass the mic on to Jordan.
Thank you very much, Elise. So what I wanted to do is just do a bit of housekeeping. First and foremost, those of you who are Katana users or are interested in Katana, saw anything to do with our announcement that Gary and I made about Katana 4 back on July 20th when we were last online with you guys. The beta phase of the Katana 4 development has begun. So if you are an individual who is Katana savvy and would like to help us test it out, reach out through our social media and info at emails, or hit me or Gary up on LinkedIn. And if you are a client with Katana licenses and you may not have seen the emails that came out about it, then definitely reach out. You know how to get in touch with us, and let's get you set up on that as well. So we're super excited. It's been basically the biggest Katana release in probably the last 5 or 6 years. So we're really excited to get into your hands. As far as tonight's format, this is an interesting opportunity for us. This is a panel where we're really not going to talk about software. I mean, software may come up. This is, we are talking with individuals that basically whose craft is applying cinematography through software. But it's really more about the art and the craft of cinematography. So Gary and I will just quickly share with you some of our images that inspire us from different films. But then each of the gentlemen will go through, introduce themselves, and kind of give you some of their key points around things that inspire them, cinematography, lighting, and so on and so forth. From that, we're going to then jump into a panel discussion and just sort of talk about the art and craft of lighting and how it's really sort of being relevant and applied in each of these gentlemen's careers, and what's going on now and where do we think it's all going. So without further ado, what I wanted to do is to share with you a few slides. So for me, Skyfall, Roger Deakins, I mean, he's an amazing cinematographer, long story career. But you'll see a trend in this sort of back in these few slides. My background's in lighting design, so I studied that at university for theatrical production. Found my way through being a TA in a computer graphics media lab into working in animation and visual effects for a few years before joining Foundry. So it's kind of, my career has kind of had a path through that. But I'm always drawn to lighting that really becomes a huge part of the story. I admire lighting in cinematography where it's very subtle. But I think with that sort of, focus on lighting, I really love it when cinematographers can make it such an integral part. So here, the fact that the main character, Bond, is in silhouette here in the fight scene, again, the use of silhouette where light becomes such an integral part of the frame and the action and the storytelling. The fact that pose and silhouette really is what drives the action and the audience's understanding of the action. So you don't need to see the facial expressions. You can see what's happening, and obviously audio would play a huge part of this as well. Again, another one from Skyfall. Pose, posture, everything about it. Again, the fire, the light in the background, the atmosphere, it all sets the mood. It all enhances the story. And so you don't, obviously, whether it's Daniel Craig, stand-in, whoever, they're doing their part as well. But so much of the story, so much of the frame is really driven by the light. And that kind of gives you the idea of the power of the lighting portion of cinematography. And then another one, from Dan Larsson, the John Wick, or John Wick 3 specifically, such amazing use of light, color, composition, everything about it was just so amazing. You couldn't really not just be overwhelmed by this. And unfortunately, I think the first time I saw this was on an airplane on a business trip. So I had to make sure that I came home and saw this on my larger TV, and really enjoyed it. And I think the next slides are Gary, so I'll let him take over.
Thank you, Jordan. Yes, so just a brief bit. So embarrassingly enough, we're both huge Roger Deakins fans. So maybe that's why Jordan and I get on so well. So yeah, I'm going to be talking a bit about initially Blade Runner 2049. It was the last kind of film I saw at the cinema where the cinema experience made a huge impact to me. It wasn't just the visuals, but that played a large part of it. There was also the sound design was fantastic, and it really was one of those films where that the cinema experience kind of elevated it to the next level. What really kind of spoke to me, I guess, about the choice of visuals and the way that it was all done, although silhouette did actually play quite a large portion of it, it was more about kind of the framing and the choice of framing, where in so many of the shots were chosen wide, were set up that was a little bit different to the way that kind of Blade Runner initially was set up, where the kind of the hustle and bustle was an awful lot of the original film. These were a lot more just individuals in a wide angle shot in a lot of them, whereby you got a sense of the isolation and it all came through. Still beautiful visuals, really colourful. And I just saw an awful lot of images like this, whereby it just made me think of being alone. And I think the ability of the character being in silhouette and not seeing an awful lot of the actual actor himself made it a little bit easier for me to feel that isolation when you're not actually thinking of, oh, this is Ryan Gosling or this is Kay or what his name, or just seeing these kind of big wide frames, just him on his own, just kind of put me in there and made me, I guess, feel a little bit more lonely and appreciate that sense of him making his way through the world. So, and here, even though not quite the same sort of wide angle vista, I just think it was a kind of a, obviously seeing Deakins' influence throughout it, but just that sense of him making his way through the world and not so much being about him, but just putting myself in there. Another area of kind of cinematography that I'm really, really interested in and that I really love is kind of animation side of things. And that was actually kind of my first passion. I was animation. And one of the things that I've always found absolutely fascinating is color scripts. always the ability to look at and see, just from looking at the colors that are used, that and looking at it from a holistic approach across an entire film, and being able to work out what emotion I'm supposed to be feeling here, how the beats of the actual film are going to move you on a journey through it. And I'm a huge fan of those, and anyone who hasn't kind of invested any time and effort in them and hasn't really looked at them, I really, really encourage you to. I've actually got a book here, the Pixar book of color scripts, that I highly recommend to anyone, just for seeing that, not just for the use of color, for the use of framing, for just being able to get a quick sense of what the mood of that particular the shot and the composition, and how you're going to convey that story point just through the image of color and framing is really, really interesting. And I recommend it to anyone who's kind of getting into it and interested in it, whether it be, I think it helps both for live action and for animation for sure. So, and you don't have to be a great drawer. Most of these are like geometric shapes. They're not, you're not an amazing artist. It's just about understanding I'm sure Lou is a great artist, but I'm just saying you don't have to be a great artist to get that sense across of what you think the color and the composition is actually going to be. And that's about all I had, really. So I think, is it going to move on to Giuseppe next? Cool.
Indeed it is.
Hello, everybody. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. This is very cool, given the fact that photography and cinematography are a big part of my career. And I've done photography and cinematography since I was 17 or 16, so a long, long time. And then transitioned into the 3D world with some efforts here and there. So I wanna just show you a couple of things that are part of my past and my present, and hopefully they are as an inspiration for everybody else. I always apologize for my pizza accent. Unfortunately, you'll have to deal with it because I'm from Italy. So this frame here is from the Lego Movie 2, which was one of the funniest projects I've ever worked on. And I wanted to show you this because obviously as a still frame, it doesn't really give you that much, but this was one of the crazy setup of the movie. And you have these crazy camera movements that go all the way around this room. And I did the sequence setup for this sequence, the lighting setup for this sequence. And you have moving lights and change of lights and disco lights. And then you have character lights and environment lights and plants that glow. And this is just like to show like that today's complexity when it comes to lighting is really, really, really interesting. And like in these days when I was looking to choose like what frames to show today, it's like, how would I even do this in a live set, right? Like that would be something that would be very complicated. And funny enough, like the guys before me showed Roger Deakins images, which I'm a big fan of, and I'm on his forum, and sometimes we exchanged some messages, and he was saying that the biggest advance in digital, in the cinematography today is actually the size of the cameras. It's not the resolution or the colors or anything else, because those cameras now allow us for a lot more movements through the scene. And this is one of the examples there where you would need very specialty cameras to do a shot like this. So I don't know how many people here have seen the movie, but this was a very funny shot because of that. And this is another work I'm really passionate about. I was I was leading the lighting team on this one. And although the lighting here is relatively simple, so it's just, like this sunlight coming from the sky and this sort of Jesus Spider-Man that is hanging there. It was very interesting because it's something that a lot of students ask me a lot of times regarding the difference between animated feature films and live action. And this was one of the cases where we actually had the freedom, thanks to Marvel, to do the sequence the way we wanted. And there was nothing shot in this sequence. So it was completely CG. And we could do the cameras ourselves, and we could do the lighting ourselves. And that's not something that happens every day. So there was something that I was really, really happy to work on. And sometimes it happens. So before you choose, animated feature films versus visual effects, keep in mind that with the power that we have today, we can create really words out of nothing. And so it's not always matching the plate. It's becoming more and more like, creating really a word that doesn't exist. These are two of my favorite work. And then let's get to the inspiration side, okay? So this is Jurassic Park. I think everybody knows this. If you don't know this, you are in the wrong seminar, the wrong webinar. For me, this was the revelation. At the time, I think I was, 13 or 14, I was drawing and I wanted to become a Disney animator at all costs. And then I see this and I forget about the pencil and I start studying 3D. And that's where all my problems started. So I think this is fantastic. I mean, still to this day, everything is perfect there. The 3D dinosaur, the 3D T-Rex has been like a generational impact for a lot of 3D artists there. The composition, the movements, I think this was, we can all agree that this has been one of the greatest films of all times. And definitely is in my heart. I haven't worked on a Jurassic Park movie because for me, I think the first one is the real movie there. And, seeing all the craft and the effort that they were putting into these movies at the time is like quite mind-blowing. On LinkedIn, there's Steve Spass as well. That is the animator that actually animated the T-Rex that comments around a lot. And it's actually pretty interesting to see today being able to work on that kind of movie. For me, it's really the realization of a dream. So I thought this was nice to show. And then we can get to animated feature film inspiration. I think Toy Story 4 today represents really a switch in the quality of feature film animation from a cinematographic standpoint. It's incredible what they've done, and not just the quality of the shading that is perfect everywhere, but is the integration finally between the realism of cameras and lenses and the storytelling that animated feature films can give us. And that's where I think the two things are really converging, because now we have a realistic or a familiar look through cameras, through digital cameras, digital lenses, mixed with the powerful tools that we have in 3D. And so that's a new thing. I think when I see this frame, for example, with the anamorphic lenses and the detail that is in there, the lighting is gorgeous. And then there are all these other frames. I've picked a few, like the composition here. Like this is really like telling a story through cinematography, like the images in silhouette that we saw before, but with the power of the 3D tools that we have today. I think this is mind-blowing, and it's amazing to learn how they have emulated the cameras with the VR, so that the movement of the cameras was on point and very similar to what we are used to, because like cinematography in the end has been to our eyes for a long time. So it makes sense to add those kind of subtleties to this kind of product that, by definition does not have that by default. And then there are so many different situations of lighting, really impressive stuff. Moody lighting with low-key exposure, very contrasty backlit lighting with rain, very colorful lighting, and very and lighting enhanced by camera use for example, with wide-angle lenses close to the characters. So I think this is really a movie that, as an artist, needs a little bit of study. There is a beautiful book, The Art of Toy Story 4, and even the color scripts are really good for that too. I'm happy that you pointed that out, because we are dealing with color scripts in Bardel now, working on our movie, and it's actually really cool to see the whole thing coming alive through colors, really. I want to briefly touch on this too. I think that's one thing that nobody really mentions often in schools as well. And I think it's really important to point that out, that, we use advanced tools and photography, but these guys here, the master painters, didn't have anything, right? Like this is Caravaggio, obviously, Calling of San Matthew. And when I do lighting, I always have this image or these other paintings in mind where you have really directional lighting, where each light is justified and has a specific purpose. It's not just throw the light there and, let it do its job. It's really more complicated than that. And I invite all the students that are here to go in a bookstore and buy some classic art book and get some knowledge out of that, because it's really important to understand how hard this was during that time. For us, it's easy. I take the light, I strike a light here, and I have what I want. I can move it around with live rendering, Katana live rendering, and everything else, So lucky, you guys, so lucky. I wish I had these tools when I was your age. So make a good use of it. And I just want to touch briefly on some things. I've done photography commercially for many years, fashion photography first, portrait photography, some wedding photography for a couple of years, and then I switched, and now I only do fine arts. And if you guys want to look and you like outdoors, you can look at Galen Rowell, amazing old school photography, film, obviously. So much film lost in wrong exposures there. No undo, no delete, no view behind the camera. Only very, very good skills. And it's interesting, if you see some of the current photographers online that have YouTube channels, some of them are going back to the film just for the challenge and the learning experience. I always say, my students, when you take a light and you put it in a set, it's a different experience, a different perception than just turning a light on in 3D. So get that experience, because you will remember a lot more what it means to light a real set than not just having the freedom that you have in CG to move the lights around. And finally, this inspired me to actually go out there and take these kind of pictures. And for me, it's like, between doing visual effects or animated feature film job and doing fine art, it's the lighting and the cinematography is where everything is at. So that's what I've got. I'll pass it. I don't remember who's next, Andrew or Christophe? You guys.
It's over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was awesome, Giuseppe. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this panel with some amazing artists. So I really appreciate being here. So I'm Andrew Roberts. I'm a CG supervisor and VFX supervisor, most recently with Scanline in Los Angeles. Scanline are most known for their natural phenomena, fluids and so on, but then also photoreal digidoubles and set extensions, Game of Thrones, King's Landing Destruction, Joker, that kind of thing. This is some of the shots that I've worked on at Scanline. And so in the upper left, there's some frames from Aquaman. And then we've also got Cosmos Possible Worlds at the top in the center, and then off to the right, Gemini Man. And these frames are constructed sort of primarily digitally. Well, in the upper left, there was photography that the work was based on. But looking at, say, the lower left, that's sort of very sort of strong imagery. And in the center also, an Aquaman. Although Don Burgess was the DP and created beautiful artwork for the film, so much of that really came from the work of the visual effects supervisor, Brian Hirota, and the client-side John Desjardins. And as Giuseppe was saying, that so much of cinematography nowadays can really come from working within the package, rather than just limited to what's shot on set. For smaller shows that I've worked on at Scanline, I would be the CG supervisor, where I'm working from tracking and sort of the beginning all the way through and handling all steps of the process and working with the team for that. So that was the case with Cosmos and then also Gemini Men, where we had a smaller shot count. But for larger, more complex shows like Aquaman and then also Godzilla versus Kong, it's where I've specialized as more as a lighting supervisor. So working directly with the lighting team, looking at the different sequences, ensuring that we understand the visual intent of each sequence, and then working with the artists and the VFX suit to develop those setups and make sure that the look comes across. Visually, the philosophy would be to get the shots as close as possible to what the intent is, but then also giving the compositors through AOVs and mats the ability to dial and make those adjustments to really get, sort of the inevitable iterations that are going to come as a client really wants to get it just right. Just to touch on a few highlights of my background. I actually started off in the world of programming. I studied as an analyst programmer, but then ended up coding for an architect's firm. And so that was an introduction to me to computer-aided design and AutoCAD, as I had an opportunity to join Autodesk. And then at Autodesk, that was sort of a shift in my career when I went from drafting software to being exposed to 3D Studio. And that was really where then things took off for me, because then I started working in the games industry in the UK. I got to produce some graphics for a show in London in the late 90s. And it was just me and a couple of artists just sort of working out of his living room that we created these environments for Videotech. And that was just very rewarding to create these environments, to do this animation, to sort of set the scene. And then, a few weeks later to turn on a TV and actually see that work. So sort of that, I just got the bug by that time. I just knew that computer graphics in some form was definitely going to be sort of where I continued my career. Having a technical background has always been useful, but it was the visuals that really grabbed me. I moved to the States in '97, and one highlight that I would point out would be working at Digital Dimension. We were all generalists, and so would work from tracking all the way through to working on comps. But I worked with so many fantastic, talented artists, particularly on Final Destination 2 was a big one for me, the log sequence. Working with guys like Jason Crosby and James Coulter, who developed the dynamics and the particle system, was really great. And that was sort of a key moment that I would point to. Generally speaking, I've sort of worked with generalists, and at some of those smaller vendors, even up to places like Pixomondo, a generalist would work from scene assembly and then focus also on lighting and rendering. Some of the smaller shops, you would sort of pick up a lot more of those tasks. I would also point to SIGGRAPH as a big inspiration for me, particularly coming from more of a technical background. I didn't really see myself as an artist. It sort of felt pretentious to even describe myself in that way. But being amongst a community of artists at things like SIGGRAPH, watching the electronic theatre and seeing work from artists all over the world, and so you're seeing from film school in France or photography students in Tokyo was again sort of very inspirational and exciting to me. And as I say, that sort of brings me up to today, where I'm working with Scanline on some high-end projects, which is really enjoyable, and some very, very talented artists. It's some of the tool set that generally is used at the vendors that I've worked with, and it's probably quite similar to most of the other panelists. Generally speaking, it's not too critical what those tools are, particularly now with open formats and with OpenVDB and Alembic and OpenEXR. You can really focus more on the art, more so than what program am I in. And also Katana. So generally speaking, I'll be working with artists at the facility, but whenever I have an opportunity to go on set, whether it be for independent projects or as a VFX soup on location scout, that's always extremely rewarding to me. And it's working on set that really allowed me to develop appreciation for the DP, for the cinematographers, watching them paint with light, set the tone and the mood, and actually just physically move lights around. And you can sort of see all this stuff happening in the background, but then when you focus in on, okay, what's happening with the set, all of a sudden, they've changed from, sort of day to night. Shadows cast through sort of some gobos and creates a completely different mood. Was really educational, and so much respect for what DPs are able to create. I want to touch on a couple of images that sort of have informed my view of art and kind of inspired me. So on the left are a couple of paintings by an artist called Jill Walker. She relocated to Barbados in her 30s, and she paints sort of lots of scenes of life on that island. My mother's from Barbados, and we would go, as a family, we would go back every couple of years. And I really just loved sort of how specific some of these portraits were, showing, someone sort of selling coconuts or building a boat. And as a young child, I would just sit and stare at some of these images and construct these ideas about, who these people were or what might be happening in their lives. And just bringing those stories that I could personally identify with into imagery was something that kind of resonated with me. And so moving off to the image on the right now, where I'm getting into my teens, I was into the music industry and I was DJing sort of at the weekend. And this kind of image where, again, you can construct some stories and ideas about what might be happening, those conversations between those people was sort of very interesting to me. I've always been into graphic novels and comics, and the work of Alex Ross I found really beautiful, and strong sense of lighting and that mood can tell you so much about the character, and so just a couple frames I just shot from a couple of my novels, graphic novels. And if you just look at the image on the left, with the, I love his musculature and the way that he sort of has that 60s kind of physiology to his characters, but the way that the lighting is set, where their eyes are in shadow, you get this sense of, clearly these are superhumans who are looking down on you, the human viewer. There's so much, to me, I think can just come through even lighting. And so I would just love looking at these images. And the story, of course, was important, but for me, I would just love looking at particularly, sort of these beautifully crafted frames. Onto the photography side, I've always been into music, and these were a couple of posters on the left, Dexter Gordon, Miles Davis, and just love the high key lighting, how the background just drops off into darkness. And again, just the way that image has been framed tells you so much about the character, particularly the Miles Davis frame, which I think is actually an album cover. You can almost sense the music in his head, sort of the mad genius of Miles. And so it's really sort of like an interesting character study. And the frames on the right that I've selected here are from Insecure, which is a comedy show on HBO. It's bold to me for a different reason. I love the fact that the DPs, Ava and Patrick, didn't shy away from lighting dark-skinned people in a dark environment. And in contrast to other sitcoms that came sort of decades before, where maybe they didn't really know how to handle that, and so they would just blast a lot of light into the scene. And so the environment might look overlit in order to, sort of for them to feel like, okay, these characters, kind of we can see them now. But understanding how to treat and light Black people, that it's about the reflectance of the skin. It's about, maybe some moisturizer so that there is reflecting, and then there's large, soft lights and colored lights. Also using a polarizer to allow you to shape the reflectivity. I think creates just some really beautiful imagery, and that's really impressed me. It's, as I say, it's quite different from what came before. And within this genre of artists doing this kind of work, I could point to other things, Selma, Queen and Slim, things like that, which are really pretty beautiful. And certainly improvements in cameras like the Canon, the 5D Mark II and the Arri Alexa can help low light sensitivity and just that freedom to be able to move things around. but then it's really also about the lighting and understanding how to light characters. So again, that just sort of comes back to, for me, really being able to just look at an image and tell a story and understand what those characters are about, and resonating with characters that look like me, that I could personally identify with. A couple of shots, that I've lit that I just wanted to mention briefly. And I like these for two different reasons, but funnily enough, they sort of end up with a lot of similarities between the two of them. So the image on the left was from Aquaman. And so we're doing this 180 pan of the lighthouse with the sort of its backlit. And it's sort of very happy, dreamy moment within the movie. For the most part, it's a beautifully lit plate. It's being framed by the, I guess that was second unit that actually had a helicopter. The one element that we added that I was lighting was the tower. And so everything else is plate. There's some cleanup on the ground there. But then just working initially from a HDR and the spherical image that one of our matte painters created, but we can't rely on HDR. That's a great starting point, I always feel. But then I'm also then, refining the warmth of the key, looking at the color temperature of the shadows, adding extra fill. That was a really very rewarding thing, just to spend time kind of crafting that light to just try and bring that CG element into the lighthouse and make it work over the course of the shot. And with a 180, we sort of started off on the left and went all the way around. And so I really liked that. The image on the right was for a piece. It was a collaborative animation project. And my piece was this children's playground. We each selected a line from a poem that an actor, Timothy Ware, wrote, just to do with police brutality and his wish that things could go back to a simpler time. So the line that I selected focused on, wouldn't it be nice if we could just go back to playing red light, green light? And so from that, I took the idea of children playing and the innocence of play. And so I was able to use the light to, again, sort of backlight and warmth and slight sepia tone to create the sort of evoke feelings of nostalgia, and I really just try to bring in that sense of just pure joy of children playing. That's a frame from the image, and it sort of continues as we pan and follow this little paper airplane, which is a vehicle through it. And so that was very rewarding, just to be able to create light, use light to create a mood that I wanted to sort of evoke as part of that poem. I just took a few frames from this book that I got back in the early 90s. And it's interesting because it mentions digital, electronic cinematography. But in the context of this book, electronic cinematography was just referring to video versus film. But what was so useful to me, again, coming from a technical background and not having that, I think, that foundation on the art side, I always sort of had a little bit of an imposter syndrome, where I just sort of wanted to learn as much as I could, because I felt like there's probably something that I don't know that artists do. And so this book was super helpful to me. It would break down various iconic film images, and then it would show the layout of, okay, what the key was doing, if there was a hair light, the effects you would get with low and high light. And I think it's just so important that if you're able to educate yourself on what a lighting setup might be. And of course, we have so many tools now that can go beyond a typical 3-point light setup, but still just understanding the purpose of those tools, I think, is just so important, so that you are able to craft and kind of push an image or pull it in the direction that your client or the director or you yourself as a director might want. So that's a little bit about some of the images that have inspired me. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you. And over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Jordan. So hi, everyone. My name is Christophe Brejon. So today I'm going to talk a bit about cinematography and light path expression workflow. So first thing first, I am not a cinematographer. I have worked for the past 15 years in 7 different countries, mostly on full CG animated feature films in lighting. This quick introduction I'm going to make is really a tribute to Craig Welch, who was the lighting supervisor on Lego Batman, and Grant Freckleton, who was production supervisor. If you're interested by this topic, I highly recommend the read of this article on Craig's blog called Industrialized Cinematography. So this is a traditional workflow we are used to in lighting. We generally start with a color key, painted in the art department on the left, and we try to match as best as we can in lighting in the final render, which is the frame on the right. This is really a best case scenario. Dave Walworth, he describes in this amazing PDF from last year's SIGGRAPH a similar workflow, except that there is like one big difference, and I'm quoting here Dave Walworth. He says in this PDF, we use color keys as a guide, not a destination. We try not to take our color keys too literally. We want to be open to happy accidents. And if you have a look at the bottom left, frame, which is a color key, probably painted in Photoshop, and you look at the final render from the right, which is a 3D render, there's lots of differences. And the personal conclusion I have come to is like, even if 2D and 3D, they have a lot in common. In the end, they are two different mediums, and they have also their own set of rules and laws. And I found this quote very interesting. The sequence I'm going to describe today is from Animal Logic. Basically, what we did is we skipped the 2D parts. We went directly from the photographic references to the final 3D render. And I thought it was an interesting workflow, which is quite in common in the industry. Yep. So this is the shot I'm the most proud of in my career. So this is from the wood sequence from Lego Batman. It was done at Animal Logic in Sydney. This is another shot from the sequence. And so the fun fact about the launch is no color keys were used. I didn't have any 2D references to help me. I'm not sure why, to be honest, but it was a very interesting workflow. So basically during the launch, Grant Freckleton told me, the production supervisor, told me we're going to do a sequence where the main light will be warm on the set and cold in the volumetrics. And basically my reaction was this. So coming mostly from a technically driven studio, I was not prepared, really for for this. So but as we keep working on the sequence, I really learned on what he wanted to do. So actually, this technique he described, it's been used in many movies and TV shows. This is a frame from Rango, whose DP was Roger Deakins, and you can see that the cold volumetrics, while the sun is kind of whitish. So it's very interesting to notice. And they do the same thing on Peaky Blinders. This is from the season 4. And you can notice that the sun is actually kind of warm and the volumetrics are kind of cold. So this is actually a pretty common technique. And this is another frame, from Lego Batman. So I just love this shot, even if it doesn't make sense at all. The impact of the sun on the floor is kind of a bit warm, and the volumetrics are cold. But to me, even if it's not logical, the frame is just like beautiful. And in the end, it's just, I think this cold volumetric technique is just a way to, to get a nice complementary color scheme in the frame, otherwise it would be pretty much monochromatic, which for this movie, this, Lego Batman, it would not really fit. Sorry about that, this movie. So back to the launch. So as I told you, there was no color key. So we had a Grant. He showed me some references from this movie from 1985 starring Tom Cruise called Legend. And he told me to focus on the illogical sources of light. Some come from the left, others from the right. It doesn't make really sense, but I love that. So this is what we call generally, dramatic lighting or studio lighting. And so this is I try to achieve, in this sequence. So if you pay attention, we have, bounces and rim lights coming from many direction. Doesn't make really sense, but that's super look. I think, looking good. What is really interesting with this workflow, it gives a lot of freedom to the artist. And so I would be, interested to know if, Giuseppe, you felt the same way on Lego Batman, on Lego 2, sorry. But it's, we had a look at these frames from Legend, and And then, you know, there was no micromanagement, you know, no pixel fucking, you know, and I was just, you know, throwing lights, you know, the way I felt, you know, and keeping in mind this general direction. And I think it was just a great way, you know, to start on a sequence. And so this is a frame on we did as well. So really, I really want to emphasize this. It's a team effort and a 3D process. So why is it a team effort? It's because basically I will do, you know, 1 pass, 2 pass, maybe 3 passes of lighting. And then what would Grant do? He would take, you know, my AOVs, my light path expression, LP, you know, into Photoshop or Nuke or whatever, and he would play with them. So it's really, you know, team effort, because I would provide, you know, some AOVs, and then he would tweak them to get the final look. And what is interesting as well, it's a 3D process. So there's no 2D involved. I have nothing against 2D, I actually love 2D, but it makes my life easier because I don't have to interpret a brush stroke. And sometimes we struggle in lighting because a brush stroke in 2D looks beautiful, but what does it mean in 3D? How do we translate that into a DCC software? So I thought this is why I like so much this workflow. And when he would have a look at my renders, you know, Grant, he would often say, you know, you have too many lights canceling each other, you know, and this is the main advice I give to my students. So I'm going to show you an example, a quick example, you know, of a light path expression workflow. So this is a frame from the short film experiment that we've done, you know, last year at NC in Avignon. So on the left, we have a first pass from a student whose name is Margot Viriat. And on the right, this is me using basically the same lights, okay, but playing in Nuke in real time without any noise to come up with something else, okay? So in the end, in the final movie, we didn't choose any of these 2 frames. We went for something completely different. But it was really, really interesting, you know, to see like how far can you go using the same, you know, AOVs or LPs. Okay, so there were 4 lights in this shot. It was a pretty simple setup. Okay, and it's very interesting to see how much you can push this in real time without any, you know, any noise. So I didn't add any light, obviously. I had to work with this material. But as you can see, I came up with something very different. So it just, and there is no 2D interpretation. It's full 3D. So when you go back from Nuke or, you know, whatever compositing software you're using back into the DCC software, it's pretty much straightforward, okay? So I thought this workflow was really interesting. So the conclusion that, you know, that I have reached is we need PBR-friendly art directors, especially for full CG, you know, cartoon PBR movies. And it's and the LP workflow, it's a great way to achieve that, because I'm pretty sure that Grant, you know, never felt limited by this workflow. On the contrary, I think he was really happy because it's a very fast process, you know, much faster than painting directly in 2D, in my opinion. And the thing as well that was really interesting is if he felt like, you know, it was missing maybe a rim light, he would just ask for it. We would provide it the rim light, and then he would play, you know, with the AOVs into Photoshop. Just to finish this introduction, it's just a quick note about the lighting workflow. So I have stolen this frame from the RenderMan presentation from last year because it's, you know, it just shows a traditional CG animation pipeline. And as you can see, lighting is pretty much at the end, okay, of this pipeline. And nowadays we try to work more this way, okay. And I found this really interesting, and it's really what's happening, I think, nowadays in animation studios. And I just wanted to share with you the experience we had on this movie. So it's a Playmobil movie. This was done with Gary Arender. And what we did is we lit some rough layouts. And the whole idea behind this, it was an idea by Pascal Bertrand and Rachid Chik, you know, is like, why would lighting come at the end of the process on an animation movie, okay? And if you look at what they did in VFX, like on The Lion King, on Avatar, it's pretty much the same thing, right? With pre-visualization, right? And we did the same thing on Playmobil. So it will be like first storyboards and rough layouts and then lighting. And it will, you know, there are many, you know, good things coming from that. Is the director, he has a pretty precise idea of what the movie is going to look like. And the animators, they can actually do a play blast with the lights in it. So it can be as well very useful for this department. So same thing for set dressing, final layout, etc. So this is the rough layout frame, and this is the final frame from the movie. So the only thing that has changed is the look development of the assets. but I can tell you that it is, 90% the same light rig in both frames. And I thought it was really, a nice, really out of the box thinking. I've never, lit rough layout in any other studio, and I thought it was a great way to think about workflows. I just wanted to, quickly mention, this amazing video game I've been playing for the past 2 months, and it's just a great cinematography. And I'm sorry, I don't have any frames because it's, pretty graphic, this video game. So I didn't want to put any frames, but it's just a beautiful cinematography, and it's they did an amazing job. So I just wanted you, if you haven't played and you're not, bothered by violence and zombies, just go for it. And sorry, yeah, the frame is not great, but just wanted to mention my favorite live action cinematography is from the original Blade Runner. It's by Jordan Cronenweth, and it's just, I know some people have watched it in black and white or upside down or, or mirror thing, and it's, I don't know, every shot, every frame feels like a painting. So I just wanted to mention it. And thanks for being here.
Very cool. Thank you, Christophe. And thank you, everybody else, for all your contributions as well. So we've had some great questions coming in. So Andrew, thank you for diving on the answer for one of them. But I want to sort of expand on that because I think Andrew jumped on a really interesting question. And I think there's, between the group of you, we could probably expand on this from 2 angles. So the question is, how do you handle lighting of a sequence? But I think there's an interesting thing to dive into, which is the process, the thought process and the execution the same in the typical sense, or like on average, between visual effects and animation? So Giuseppe, maybe you want, jump on that one? We'll start with you and we'll just move across it. So we got Giuseppe, sure. Gary, Andrew, and then Christophe in terms of how it's laid out on my screen. I don't know how it shows for everybody else.
I guess the main difference between the two things is that visual effects have always a plate as a reference, or most of the time. And so you are somehow limited in within what you can do with that. That doesn't mean that you have to stick to that plate 100%, because a lot of times we manipulate the plate to the point that the plate is not the plate anymore. And, we add on top of that and we change the lighting. And there is so much work that goes into merging all the elements together. But in feature films, in animated feature films, there is more of a concept development at the early stage, I would say. Things happen in 3D only after an extensive research in terms of art and color and look, whereas in visual effects, that's not always the case, unfortunately. And you end up doing stuff without having a clear idea of where you're going sometimes, right? And this happens in all productions because the complexity today is so big that there is so much to do that it would almost be impossible to actually do a character work or an in-depth work from a conceptual standpoint for everything that is in there. So I think that would be the main difference, is that there is a lot more pre-production and artwork that obviously ties into the storytelling in an animated feature film. In terms of technicalities, the realization of the elements is the same. You have modeling, look depth, and lighting. And so that part is pretty much seamless. Of course, you have the integration versus the creative side of lighting, which is a big deal. Some people don't like to do creative lighting. Some people prefer to do matching, live matching, or because they are more into photorealism or matching exactly what's going on. I have changed, like I've done a lot of visual effects before, and now I prefer feature film animation just because there is a little bit more creative freedom there. But that said, as I said before, this is also changing because now we have completely fake worlds that we can create in 3D. So the two things are becoming more similar than what one would think.
It was, like you gave me the perfect setup to hand it off to Gary as he worked on Jungle Book and Lion King. So perfect segue. Thank you.
Yeah, so the thing that I find the difference between VFX and kind of the CG heavy animation films, so like Jungle Book and Lion King, with the ones where I'm matching a plate, it's usually a neutral plate. So if you've got a sequence, the way that it all kind of gets unified is often done in comp. You're matching the plate, you're making your CG elements getting there, but sometimes the light of day's changed a little bit, or there's some part of it that means if you plate them all together, it doesn't quite work, and it all comes together when you take it into something like Nuke, and you can push and pull it and get it so it's a unified group. But when you're doing something like Lion King or Jungle Book or something like that, you basically get a chunk of shots, and you can sit there and you can think, for this section, what mood do I want to create? You obviously get some feedback and some inspiration from the DOPs decided, I want this back from the right. Depending on how much virtual production has actually taken place. We had a fair bit more probably on Lion King than we did on Jungle Book, where they actually went into VR and they had the camera angle locked down. They actually said, we want the light coming from back here. But that's without like the hair of the characters, because you don't tend to have that in things like Unreal or Unity. They just can't cope with that kind of complexion. And when you start having the light coming off the character when it's been lit properly, you take that as a guide and as an inspiration, and but you still want to push and pull it and make something that's a beautiful shot. But the tools that you have nowadays, and I'm going to mention Katana because that's what I was using, enables it to make it much easier for you to do it once for the entire sequence, and then see how it works for each of the individual shots and make any individual tweaks on top of that. But you're kind of treating it much more holistically as here's 25, 30 shots that are going to be here, and it's going to, I can tell the story and the lighting story for those 25, 30 shots much easier now with what we were doing. And I think it's great. I think it's really exciting. And I enjoyed both sides of it. I think there's a certain amount of magic for I always said that I started off trying to do animation but failed, and then I moved on to lighting, so it may be my second love, but still more passionate about it now. But there's 2 points of magic for me in the whole process. The first is that animation thing where something comes alive, and there's that section of when you put something into a plate, when at that point where it just sits and it looks right and it looks beautiful and it matches, that for me is almost magic. And I get that passion when I'm doing VFX lighting. I get that thing. And but when I'm doing something like Lion King or Jungle Book, it's more the storytelling side of it that comes out of me. So I really enjoy both sides, but it's a different mindset, I think, for both. Even though things like Lion King and Jungle Book can kind of blur the line a little bit between the two.
All right, very cool. And Andrew, what about you? What's your take on it? Because I mean, you presented a lot of visual effects work. So do you think what's the difference when it goes the plate photography way?
But yeah, as Giuseppe was saying, that a lot of decisions have already been made before you, as a lighter or even a CG soup, start working. But for me, it's about looking at the sequence and kind of understanding the intent of what you're trying to achieve over the course of the shot. And at times, the beginning of the sequence might end up being something quite different. So I'm thinking of some shots in a recent movie where there was a fight sequence where by the end, just based on editorial decisions, it ends up being sort of a number of hours have passed, even though the action that took place really would only sort of be a few minutes. And so then, you're then over the course of the shot, and as a CG soup, then maybe you're building multiple light rigs to say, okay, well, this is going to get a little cooler, and we're going to drop this down, and we're going to swap out, sort of a different HDR, so that we're starting to break up the sequence into segments. And then that starts to become quite a collaboration with the comp team and with the comp soup, where you start to just sort of lay things out almost essentially like a color script with board to say, okay, well, this is these sort of 8 shots here, and now then we go to this sort of tonal quality, and then you're moving through that progression of light. I would also agree that I'm thinking about some of the sort of CG projects and independent things that I've worked on where I can come from a place of emotion and what am I trying to convey, and then actually design the light to help tell that story versus working with light rigs that you've designed or if you've been provided, but essentially you're anchoring to a plate, or even if it's sort of coming from a client and it might be a virtual environment, you're working with something that, you know, decisions have been made, but then it's about just working to get something that fits, you know, fits the intent of the image and is real for whatever that world is. The other thing I would just say is that generally speaking, as an artist, or at least from a visual effects point of view, you're not going to be lighting a sequence, but you're going to be given, you know, a series of shots within that. And so it's going to then be a collaboration with teams of other artists who you're picking up from or you're handing off to, and that then it's very important to be working sort of just organization and consistency. So having sort of a single light rig that everyone is using, or everyone within your group that's going to have the same color scheme, to ensure that, you know, the light position isn't moving. And so using, you know, sort of external references so that, okay, you load that in, and when we load the scene and we assemble things, the sun is always in the same position. And then, so we would sort of like have layouts to understand sort of top down, okay, these are all the cameras, and this is sort of where the light is, so that regardless of where you're swinging around, the key light is still sort of in the correct position. And so sort of having some of those top down tools so everyone is inheriting the same setup. I mean, it's kind of standard for us, but just having those kind of workflows is important to ensure consistency, because you are sort of working as part of a team, generally speaking.
Absolutely. Okay, and then Christophe, what about you? I think you also had a great video that you did where you talked about sequence lighting and planning that out.
Yes, yeah, definitely. There is a whole chapter on my website about it. I haven't worked much in VFX, but the thing is, okay, the thing I'm trying to describe in my chapter is like, okay, you can plan things, you know, listen to the dialogues, you know, and when you prepare the lighting for a sequence, and, you know, you can, you know, put the shots in different categories, you know, like when they are similar, so you can, you know, how you're going to spread the shot between artists and everything. But the thing is, so the thing I'm trying to say in my website is plan as much as you can, you know, try to be organized, so, you know, it's not a complete mess. But I would say as well, you know, try to be open to happy accidents. Like exactly what Dave Wolford said in his PDF, because I think it's pretty much important that when you work in a light rig, at some point you will be lost, which is completely normal. You probably have, you know, too many lights all over the place, okay, and it's and, you know, and lots of noise, and it's okay to, you know, change a bit the plan according to the images you're trying to do and to produce. So the thing is, try to plan as much as you can, but stay open to what actually come in the final renders. And it's so yeah, that's just my quick take on it.
Okay, very cool.
Jordan, very briefly, there are two things that just came to my mind for the guys that were asking these questions. One thing is that when you do animated feature films, you comp your shots, so that's very important most of the time. Whereas in visual effects, you usually have a comp department that takes care of that for you. So if you guys are thinking where to go, keep in mind that that's a skill that you can recycle for sure. And the extent of the comp of a feature film, assuming the lighting is done properly, is not quite as big or complex as a visual effects movie. So there are differences there. I'm not saying that it's easy, but it's definitely slightly different. The other thing that I was thinking is that with today's tools, and that's just to join Christophe on the experimenting and let accident happen. With today's tools, we have the possibility of putting the lights and have things change real time. So whenever there is an art concept that was done with the idea in mind by the art director or the artist, that does not mean that maybe swinging the light a little bit around won't give you a better shadowing or things like that. Yeah. So we also try to, experiment with that because it's quick today. In the old times, we had to simulate bounce. We have to put fake lights everywhere. We do anything without waiting and clicking rendering. Yeah. Now you can. And so I think the whole process is becoming a lot more organic that way.
Absolutely. And you, once again, sort of, did a great job of setting me up for the next question, which is...
sorry, Jordan, I'll just jump in real quick, just to
please go ahead.
Something that Giuseppe was saying, that even for lighters, I think it's important to have some comp familiarity and skill. And so even though, yes, within a visual effects context, there would be a comp department that's really going to be taking the shot to final, it's been important at all the facilities I've worked in. I've generally tried to encourage lighters to have a vision for what their work is, what they're trying to achieve. And so providing at least a slack comp or a light comp, something that they could even hand off, or even if they're not handing off their new script, to be able to present that image that the comper who's sort of picking it up can get a sense of, okay, I see what you've done, and encouraging that sort of buddy, that partnership between an artist and a compositor, so that you can have that conversation about, okay, what mats do you think you're going to need here, and does that work for you? And so I think it's important for lighters to really understand how the image is constructed, and not just sort of render elements and chuck it over the wall and then hope that comp's going to be able to figure it out from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's always advisable to say, even like you want to sort of know a bit of the department before you and a bit of the department after, you got to sort of be able to go talk to them in their own language to get what you need for your work. One of the things I wanted to ask you guys is that, so everybody's got a range of experience, a range of sort of when people got started, and you were, just be talking about having to sort of fake lights everywhere and things like that, which made me flash back to my first job and waiting, and IPR in its first form in Maya was just such a blessing when it first came out. And of course, now we look back at that and you're like, but that's exactly one of the things I wanted to touch on. I don't necessarily want to get into too much software, but wanted to look at and hear your gentlemen's thoughts about cinematography techniques and how much can people find parallels between all this rich resources. You've got the University of YouTube, you've got all these books everywhere. Andrew, you sort of offered up a bunch of examples. Those techniques that are being sort of building on the craft and handing down ideas for eons. It feels like between led by the rendering engines, path tracing, global illumination, live rendering, there is the opportunity for a lot of people to take live cinematography techniques and now apply it. Now there's also then on the other side of it, the sort of virtual production LED wall side of it as well. There's the direct application of it in games, like the one that you mentioned, Christophe, and then one of my favorites, Horizon Zero Dawn, another great one. But then I want to mix with that, sort of the pure CG side of it. So someone asked, Matthew asked, in this day and age, are people still tweaking material properties when sort of the advertisement of PBR is that you shouldn't have to tweak on a per shot, per lighting scenario basis? But are you guys finding still in production that you are massaging material properties to get that shot over the finish line or that sequence over the finish line? So we'll go around the same order as last time. So we'll start with you, Giuseppe.
Well, no, we don't tweak because our look dev is absolutely perfect. So there is no... No, I mean, like, that's a myth. It's a myth because, like, the complexity of first of all, there's so many artists working on a movie, right? Like, every artist, as much as you want to make a pipeline that is streamlined and consistent, there are always mistakes that happen. And there is always something that you didn't think about. And then there's always that problem that comes the Friday before the delivery, classic. So you have to go into the shot and sometimes change a little bit. And also, it's like, we don't want to approach, I don't think, that's my personal opinion, this job as to too much of an industrialized process as a factory process, right? There is still a little bit of feeling that you want to give to your shot, a little bit of emotions that you want to convey. And so if that material tweak helps, you know, I don't know, emphasizing that glint as a storytelling element, why not, right? Now, your question is huge. Like, this would need a whole different webinar, because the convergence...
Well, we'll just keep it into like the footnotes, just the, you know, table of contents. Then,
like the convergence between real-time cinematography with traditional cinematography, like the whole planet is basically going into that, right? Virtual production, not just because of COVID, but also because it does make sense for a director to be able to see immediately what's going to happen on the screen. And that comes also to what Christophe was saying, like, why don't we light the layouts so we have a perception of the movie right off the bat, right? On the other side, on set, you can do the same thing with LED walls. Now, I personally don't think we are already at the point where we can use real-time engines to do a movie, but for sure, as a strong pre-visualization and as a strong tool to decide what's going to happen, it's definitely a huge thing. And I think knowing what exposure means, what, you know, like depth of field means, hyperfocal, and all the kind of skills is definitely a good tool to have in your back pocket for the future, because these things are definitely going to merge more and more. And even games are becoming so complex and so beautiful. What's there is that technicalities are becoming less of a limitation today. And so your language is what counts more. And this is a non-linear process, because we are definitely speeding up the rendering capabilities and all the technical options that we have. So I guess become a better artist, learn how to communicate better is, at this stage, I believe, a more important thing than knowing the tools at 100% level.
Yeah, awesome. Gary?
So first of all, about the kind of the PBR materials, as I think we're all probably going to say, is yes, you do end up changing it, even if the cinematography is perfect, if the kind of the original look dev is perfect. If you imagine, like, look in the background, you can see I've got a light that's bouncing off some of my film collection. Imagine you're in a shot where your director says, I don't want to see that because it's distracting. It's not that that's not realistic. On a set, they'd go and they'd spray something on it to knock the specular back. What you'd do is you'd dial something back. You go into the look dev and you'd take it out. So you're not doing anything that they wouldn't do on a set. You're just tweaking things that make it a prettier, better image. You just probably have more options than they would have in if they were doing something in for real. For instance, I had a shot on Lion King where there's a big thing where they're going over the wildebeest, and the wildebeest are all starting to stampede. Spoiler for anyone that hasn't seen it. And we got some kind of specular kind of hits on the back of the some of the characters, that when you can imagine how much dust was being kicked up, it wasn't realistic, but B, it also kind of distracted the whole kind of environment that you were doing. So you just went in there, you tweaked the look dev that was fine for the rest of the shots, just to knock that back to make sure it wasn't distracting. And they're the kind of things that you just learn to do. And because the last thing you can do is to go in when a director says, you know what, that's a bit distracting, can you dial it back? You say, no, my look dev's perfect. I'm not changing anything. You don't have that option, so you work out a way of making it work. So yeah, for sure, you're going to be tweaking the PBR stuff, because even PBR stuff in real life, you now have more tools available to you than are sometimes available in real life, which is great. And there's downsides to it as well. With regards to virtual production, the way things are going with regards to game engines, the thing with game engines is they're fantastic when you're working within their limitations, but you kind of reach a ceiling with what they can do. There's if you find some of the behind the scenes of some of the places where it's being used, it's not perfect, and it can't do everything. I mean, the next King Kong is not likely to be projected on a virtual screen right now, because hair would be a nightmare for something like that to be done in real time to the level of the complexity that you need there. And will we get to a point where things like that will be done? Yeah, I think we will at some point. But you are right now 500 lights with hair and fur and real complex pieces of geometry. We're just not quite there with that kind of thing. What's happening is you're going to see more of what was traditionally post-production work moving more towards pre-production work. And as long as you learn the tools of lighting, as long as you know the principles of lighting, whether you're doing it after the fact or before the fact, there's still going to be work for it, and there's still going to be the need for the tools that enable you to do that. So it's still, whatever kind of workflow you're going to be doing, it's still an exciting time and a really good time to be in the business, because you're not having to cheat. You're not having to learn all of the raised tricks of projecting and all the rest of it. You have a much nicer way of working right now. But, you know, with all of those things, you just want to learn all the bells and whistles, and it'll always translate to whatever the solution's going to be in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, for sure.
Cool.
Oh, man. It's great.
What's your thoughts on it, Andrew?
Well, I'd certainly agree that you know, an asset is never done, and particularly with, you know, your work being in service of the story, that you know, whether it's shaders or it may even be sort of the scale of the character. Okay, at the beginning of the movie, we needed him to be imposing and, you know, huge, and sort of later in the movie, we need him to be chasing them, you know, sort of in the London Underground or the subway or whatever. So he needs to be smaller, and so forget that, because the audience's visual memory is actually quite short. So that's not the point. And so then maybe as the scale of the character changes or some other characteristics in service of story, now your shaders or your lighting needs to adapt. So there's never ever just one thing that you know, it's not going to be, so it's done, I'm happy, and, you know, never touch it again. It's that ongoing sort of iterative process and collaboration, you know, between assets and animation and lighting and the comp, but, particularly for visual effects, that's definitely sort of the way that we work. Finding the virtual production, that's sort of very exciting, and thinking about the work that was done on, say, Gravity or Solo or Mandalorian, and just, you know, having sort of images sort of like pre-production, you know, is that what you call it now? It's not post anymore. It's some other term that where you're creating your environment and then bringing that on set and then using that to illuminate and reflect, and just really integrate the characters so that you're just catching it in camera, you know, sort of a true shot. So it feels sort of like going back to sort of, you know, model making days, or sort of more of the physical, you know, like this is what you capture is what you get. And sure there's an opportunity to go back, and even though you do have those projected images, to still go back and maybe say, well, I'm still not happy with it, so let's, you know, maybe throw up a green screen and we're actually going to tweak it further. But a lot of shots that normally you would sort of have, okay, well, it's just a little green in the corner, or you know, now it's, let's just project that and the shot is finished. So it's going to be very exciting to see as those real-time engines continue to evolve, and those techniques then expand from being, you know, like a dome to maybe other levels of projected material, sort of how that affects, you know, sort of our language and what the freedom that we're able to create images.
Very cool. And what about you, Christophe?
Well, my quick take on this, it's I'm going to talk only about full CG animated feature films. I would say the risk for us, because we don't have the experience from a live action set, you know, the culture, is that the risk for us would be to think like, okay, we've done this perfect PBR look there, we'll just do the best master lighting we can, and we're done. And this is something I have seen, and it's a very cultural thing, you know, like really connected to full CG productions. And there is this quote from Matthias Menz, it's a great guy working at Weta, and he told me once, master lighting or sequence lighting will never give you proper cinematography. And we need shot lighting or shot tweaks so the director's vision can come true. And there is always, I think it's really a balance to find between how much can I tweak or change in a shot without, losing the viewer, the spectator. And as Andrew stated, the visual memory is pretty short. So actually, this is part of animal logic culture is we do not care about continuity. We want each shot to look as good as we can. And if you look at Lego Batman, there's plenty of continuity breaks, during the whole movie. It's pretty amazing. They even change the colors and temperatures. And I didn't think it would be, possible. And so, yeah, I would say the main risk for us is to think or full CG thing that we are CG gods, PBR gods, and everything's going to work automatically. And I think we should, back away from this.
Awesome points.
Can I add something on Christophe? Christophe, where's the budget coming and all that, though, right? It would be amazing to be able to always tweak shot by shot, but obviously some production can do it, some can't. And also, you're very lucky to work with two of the best people in the industry, Grant and Craig. So I wanted to underline that because I worked with them both very shortly. But yeah, you also need the vision of the art director and the lighting supervisor to be on that page because it's where everything is at. Really, they take the responsibility. If you discontinue from shot to shot, that's a big deal for some people, and it's not always possible. But it's a very good point. So thanks for saying that, Christophe.
So I just sort of got reminded that we're about an hour 20 in, and I think we could keep going for much longer. So I'll try and let's sort of end it on a fun note, and then we can maybe a few of us can answer questions in the questions tab if we didn't cover them. So I'll pose this challenge to you, gentlemen. So lighting, typically your toolkit, breaks down at its most fundamental level to light direction, light position in space, light intensity, light color, and then the quality of the light, like hard, soft light. If you had to light something, but you could only use one of those kind of facets, and you had to create a mood, or you had to light a shot, all right, we'll say two. We'll give you two. What two would you pick?
I think I would. I'd go with direction, initially, and just thinking of some of the Roger Deakins examples that you shared earlier, and just the shadow, rim light, just so much character that can just get, only just revealing a little bit of a profile, and color. If I had to just pick a couple, direction and color.
Awesome.
I think, if you think about lighting as adding tones or values to a black image, and then when you consider that the distance of the light from the subject relative to the subject is basically also what determines the size of the light, you can just eliminate those two already, right? So I think what Andrew said is what really counts for me too, which is the direction of the light, because that determines where you're casting the shadows. And the temperature can be a factor, although if you think in terms of values, like black and white masters of the 50s, like Miles Davis as well, and all that kind of beautiful cinematography, like they didn't even bother thinking color there. And actually that gives you more flexibility than anything, because then you can paint those colors into values too. So I guess directionality will be my pick, 100%.
Okay. Gary, Christophe, any other of you want to sort of step up for that one?
I was going to say something very similar, so it's going to be very dull. So film noir type stuff where I'm thinking of direction. I don't need soft shadows much in film noir, just hard shadows and a direction, and just cut the composition up with the way that I'm choosing where to light and where I'm choosing not to light. I've always a kind of a bit of I guess a pet peeve of mine from my VFX days is overlighting stuff when a director has or whoever it is, not even so much a director, but when someone has paid for a shot and a lot of work has gone into a model or into some piece of CG, they want to see all of it, whereas I want to embrace the darkness a lot more. So that high contrast and stuff. Yeah. So just giving me one light direction, some shadow somewhere else, and I'm happy. That's fine. I'd rather I was lit more like this and blackening this and you just didn't see one side of my face. I'd be much more happy. But so yeah, just give me one direction and I'm fine. So that's all good.
Cool. Christophe, you want to close this out then?
Can I skip the question? I cannot answer. I need them all.
Yeah, that's a fair answer.
We've seen you a lot of lights, a lot of color, and a lot of direction. So yeah.
I think it all depends on what you're trying to achieve in the storytelling. But gentlemen, thank you so much for such an awesome conversation. I would love to keep it going for another hour. So note to my colleagues, maybe we do a part 2 and get the guys back and discuss it some more.
Be happy to. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.